Firstly, welcome to this recording. The recording is one of a series of recordings that provides guidance on the unit assessments for the CIPD Associate Diploma in People Management and the CIPD Associate Diploma in Organisational Learning and Development. Next slide, please. This particular recording focuses on the assessment for Unit 5C003. That's the Professional Behaviours and Valuing People unit. You'll see that the assessment ID for this brief is 5C003-2301, indicating that that's the first assessment for 2023. Previous ones will end something like 2201, 2202, etc. Please also note that the last moderation window for this assessment brief will be September 2024. Next slide, please. So before we begin, we need to just take a moment to position the unit and be clear about what it's about. So it's called Professional Behaviours and Valuing People, and it does differ from many of the other units in that it's more personal, whereas many of the units will focus on an organisation or a system or a process or a concept. This particular unit focuses on behaviours. So it will look generally at the behaviours of people professionals, but then it really drills down into you personally. So it asks you to review your behaviours and your development journey over the last year or so. So it's slightly different. Be prepared to think inwardly, to reflect and think about yourself and the role of a people professional. Next slide, please. Before starting any assessment, it's always a good idea to get an overview of the full task. So the full task for this assessment involves 2 tasks, both mandatory, both have to be done, simply called Task 1 and Task 2. And each of those tasks has a word count, an approximate word count. So for Task 1, you have 2,250 words, and for Task 2, 1,000 words. But there's also an additional requirement in Task 2, which is for your professional development reflections. And I will come back to that as we get to that point. But overall, for this task, you will have an approximate total of 3,250 words, plus those additional reflections. Next slide, please. So we said there are 2 tasks. Let's have a look at Task 1. So Task 1 is professional and ethical behaviours, and the first paragraph there tells you what you have to do. So the task requires you to consider the significance of professional and ethical behaviours for a people practitioner and the values that go with that. So you're considering the significance of behaviours. And to complete the task, this is how you do it, you should provide a written response to 6 questions, making appropriate use of academic theory, showing your wider reading, and practical examples, showing your understanding of practical application. Next slide, please. Just a note before you begin any assessment that's question-based, and really almost any assessment, it's important that when you provide your response, you do it in a way that is very clearly laid out and signposted to your assessor. An obvious and easy way to do that is to use the question as a subheading. So in the first paragraph here, we've taken a full question as a subheading. Now that can be a little bit cumbersome and wordy, so if you prefer and if it works, you could use a redacted version of the question as in the second paragraph there. So as long as it's very clear what you're responding to, it's okay to redact the question or to use a subheading that relates to what you're responding with. Also, I would say always use the question number. You'll see there we've got Q1, and always use the assessment criteria reference. That's the little bit in brackets at the end of the subheading or the end of the question. So we've got AC 1.1 there. That's telling your assessor that you're responding to assessment criteria 1.1. And if you remember, the questions are based on the units, so the assessment criteria is part of the unit. All the questions have the assessment criteria reference at the end of them, so you only have to copy from your assessment brief. Next slide, please. So question 1, let's get started. So question 1 says that with reference to typical activities and behaviours, appraise what it means to be a people professional. Well, if you just take that question apart a little bit, you can see there's really 2 areas to respond to, not necessarily in an order, you might merge the 2, but there are 2 areas to cover. One of them is typical activities and behaviours. So you're being asked to reference the role. What does the role involve? What is the people practitioner role? What are the areas of a people practitioner role? And the obvious place to reference there is the CIPD profession map. So you're talking about the typical activities and behaviours of a people professional. However, this question is not just descriptive. There's another command verb in there, and that's appraise. So when we say appraise something, we usually mean assess the value, judge the value. If you appraise an item, you're usually in some ways judging their value. So as well as talking about what a people professional does, you need to talk a little bit about what does it mean? What's the purpose? What's the point? What's the value of the role? Why do we have a people professional role? So you're describing to some extent, but you're also appraising. Don't miss that command verb. That's really important. Okay, let's move to question 2. So next slide, please. Thank you. So question 2, we're still thinking about the role of a people professional, but we're now looking at how that role is underpinned by ethical values. There's a second part to the question which involves explaining or providing 2 examples about how that's applied in people practice. But let's just have a look at the first bit about discussing ethical values. Well, obviously, the people professional role is underpinned by ethics. When you think about the role, it's very much about concepts such as equality and fairness and trying to get the best for everyone, which is very much an ethical stance. So when you're discussing ethical values, you can make that clear link, but you might choose to begin by explaining what ethical values are, where they come from, what do you know about ethical theory. You might choose to talk about different theories such as deontology, utilitarianism, consequentialism, etc., etc. You might bring different writers in, but show your reading. This is a good chance to show your understanding of theory and some wider reading. So we want to know about ethical values and how they link to the people practice role. Now, don't forget the second part of that question, which says include 2 examples of how a people practice professional might apply those ethical values. And again, from what we've discussed, that should follow quite naturally. You might think about how a people practitioner might base decisions on evidence, so evidence-based decision making. You might consider how we operate in organisations, that we operate based on policy and procedure, and that policy and procedure in turn has come from legislation, which in turn has come from ethics. So again, when we're acting in an organisation, we're usually applying some kind of ethical values. You might think about the people practice role as a people champion, but think about your own examples. They may be from your own workplace, things you know, things you've been involved in, or it might be hypothetical. But how would a people practice professional apply ethical values? Come up with 2 real examples of how that would be to show your understanding. Let's move to question 3, please. Next slide. So question 3, and this is a really important point. We're now looking at how people professionals, the importance of people professionals being able to influence others and having a voice. And it's important that that voice is informed, clear, and confident. So why is it important, first of all? So why do we need to be heard as people professionals? Well, lots of things you can consider, some examples there. And if we're not heard, what's the point? What's the point? Are we fulfilling our purpose? Are we championing? Are we able to overcome barriers? Are we able to gender support? Are we able to influence practice? We've got to be heard, and not just heard, but we've got to be heard in a way that is informed, clear and confident. And those words are chosen on purpose. So the question also wants you to talk about why is it important that when we speak, it's informed. What are the consequences if we speak and we're not informed? What can go wrong as a people practitioner if we recommend and request things that are based on wrong information? Why do we need to be informed? Why do we need to be clear? Why do our messages need to be easily understood? Who are we making them to? Who needs to hear them and understand them? Why do we need to be clear so that we can influence others, that we can make a strong case, that we're clarifying things for others? Think about the role and why clarity is important. And finally, confidence. Again, why does it need to be confident? Think about saying it in a very weak and feeble way. Would that gain support? Would that set the tone? Would that give us a leadership stance? Why do we need to be confident? So for that question, you're considering why it's important for us to have a voice as people professionals and why that voice needs to be informed, clear and confident. Quite a big question there, but a really important one. So let's move on to question 4. Next slide, please. So for question 4, we're now looking at how we might use the people practice voice. This is one situation in which we really should be using our voice. And so we're given 2 different contexts here, A and B. And we're asked to provide an example of an issue that might cause us to raise a matter to a manager and how we would do it. So 2 contexts in which we're asked to think about that. So let's take the first one, the square on the left, the green square. So in the first situation, you're asked to consider something that is unethical, in your opinion, but it may or may not be illegal. The important thing here is that it's something you consider to be unethical. Could be all kinds of things. Think about things that you would consider unethical. Just as an example, you might see someone receiving a gift from a potential supplier and think, not sure about that. You might see someone using someone else's work and taking the credit for someone else's work. Anything that's making you feel uncomfortable, not necessarily illegal, but something that's making you feel uncomfortable or would make you feel uncomfortable. And give your assessor that as an example. Then also describe how you would handle that situation. Would you raise it to someone? Who would you raise it to? Why? And it might be in this case that you would raise it to someone, but it might be to get a second opinion. You might not necessarily be wanting to instigate a formal process. This might be something that's a bit lower key than that, but who would you talk to and why? What would make you want to raise it to someone and how would you do it? When we move across to the orange square, we're now looking at a different situation. This is where the ambiguity is out of it. This is something where you believe that someone is breaking the law, that something is being done that contravenes legislation. Again, a couple of examples here. You might see some purposeful discrimination in a recruitment activity, something that you know to be wrong and illegal, unfair treatment, discriminatory treatment. You might see someone stealing from the workplace. Just examples. Think of your own examples. What would make you think, okay, someone is contravening legislation there, that's something I need to take purposeful action on? And then describe how you would handle it. Who would you raise it to? How would you do it? So if you're in an organisation, do you know what the procedure would be for raising something that contravened legislation? So again, you're showing your knowledge here. So let's move on to question 5. So question 5, another interesting question. We've talked a lot about the importance of ethical workplaces, fair workplaces, and why, in a way, why do we want those workplaces to be fair? So this question says, discuss two theories or models relating to the human and business benefits of people at work feeling included, valued, and fairly treated. So the first part of that question, it's asking you to say, okay, we want workplaces to be valued, people to be valued, and workplaces to be fair, but why? Why? What's the benefit of that? So in the blue box, or the box on the left, you're being asked to think about that question. What evidence is there, or what thinking is there that supports the theory that there are benefits? We're fairly used to hearing about benefits for individuals, but what about benefits for organisations? There are various theories and models you can consider. There are the old tried and tested ones like Maslow and Hertzberg, which are theories of motivation, which are particularly about individuals, but then you can also extend that to motivated individuals benefiting an organisation. But try not to just stick with the Maslow-Hertzberg. Again, it would be nice to bring in some new and current thinking, show your wider reading, show your understanding of what's going on out there in the world of research. So there are some newer theories, things like Sirota's three-factor theory come to mind, but there's also a lot of recent thinking and research around this subject. People are starting to look into the organisational benefits. They are starting to come up with evidence for organisations. It's not just a nice thing to do to treat your workers well. There are benefits for organisations. And people are starting to show that in quite hard ways rather than it just being a nice thing. So you might want to consider people, writers like Quinetta Robertson, Meghna Savawal, Lisa Nishi, Michelle Morbarak, Rosalind Brewer. There's many more. Look to your centre syllabus, look to your reading lists. You could look to the CIPD fact sheets. Look around, there's a lot of new thinking coming out on this area. So show that breadth of reading, show that you are across that subject, because this is a huge subject going forwards. However, having shown your understanding of the thinking that's out there, don't forget the last part of this section, which, moving to the square on the right, the orange square, is to add your own view. So it's kind of a critical review in some ways. You're talking about what thinkers are saying, what other people are saying, but what's your view? Do you think there are benefits for individuals and organisations of fair treatment at work, people feeling valued? Do you think there's good reasons for it, and why? What evidence have you seen? What have you seen in your own working life? Have you seen benefits? Have you seen others benefit from it? Have you seen organisations benefit from that kind of good practice? So lots of reading, and also we want your own view on that as well. An interesting question, a nice question. Give it some time and thought, and make sure you do your reading before you respond. Next slide, please. So question 6. So we've talked a lot about ethics and fairness and fair workplaces, and why we would want workplaces to be fair, and why we would want people to be valued and included. So this question is now taking you into the practical application of that. And it's saying, discuss 2 ways in which a people professional can build inclusivity into an initiative, a people practice initiative. And at 2 stages, so at the design stage and at the post-implementation stage. So we want 2 ways of building inclusivity into an initiative at the design stage, and 2 ways of checking inclusivity after implementation. So it would probably help you to think about an initiative here. It might be introduction of a new system, it might be a new way of payroll, it might be something else new that's happening in the workplace, it might be an L&D project, you might be developing an open learning package, you might be developing a workshop, you might be doing any kind of HR project, something with a team, etc. So think about an initiative first of all, and then you might think about, okay, So if I was undertaking this initiative, or if a people professional was undertaking this initiative, how could they make sure at the beginning that all those who were relevant to that initiative, those that were going to be affected by it, have they been considered? Is this just coming from people practice? Is it just coming from management, or is it going wider than that? And is it looking at relevant views and needs of everyone involved, the different stakeholders, the recipients, etc.? So you might consider methods such as various consultation methods, surveys, focus groups, all kinds of things. So think about your own examples. Ideally link it to a particular initiative, which kind of gives it a little bit more structure and life. But the main thing is to say, give us at least two methods. Well, give us two methods of how you can ensure inclusivity when you're designing an initiative. Moving across to the orange box, we then want to know, okay, once an initiative has been implemented, whatever it is, how do you then check that it's effective, that it's reaching everyone? Is it reaching everyone? Have you implemented a brilliant initiative which looks fabulous, but actually no one's taking it up or no one's benefiting from it? How do you know they are benefiting from it? How do you know it's effective for them? So we might be looking at methods there, like more consultation methods, evaluation methods. Could be the same things, more surveys, focus groups, etc. So it might be easier, again, to link that to one initiative running through the two things with two methods at the design and two methods after implementation. So you're showing that you can actually put inclusivity into practice, that you have the knowledge to put it into practice. So that's question 6. Next slide, please. And if you've completed 1 to 6, you should now have full responses to all the questions. So you've actually completed task 1. And your evidence should amount to 2,250 words or thereabouts. Most centres will have a plus or minus 10%, which which you can take advantage of within that plus or minus 10%, but don't go over that because the actual word count can have a bearing on your pass or fail outcome. So that's task 1, done, well done. So let's move on to task 2. Next slide, please. So task 2. Task 2 is a professional review. So this is where we're actually moving more into you. We've talked more generally about the people practice role, and now we're moving to you, more of a personal professional review. So as it says there, this task requires you to demonstrate your commitment to professional development and performance improvement. Then to complete the task, you're asked to undertake personal reflection, self-assessment, and to consider other people's feedback, leading to an identification of strengths, weaknesses, and development areas. So it's a review of your strengths and weaknesses and development areas. Following the review, you're asked to formulate some activities to meet those development needs and to support your continuous development. So the first part of this review is to self-assess and plan for your development. And we're then going to shift that completely, and we're going to be retrospective, and we're going to look at your developments over the last 12 months. I will come back to that in a moment. So next slide, please. Okay, so question 1. Question 1 starts off this review. So it starts off the reflection by asking you to reflect on your own approach to working inclusively and to building positive working relationships with others. So you're reflecting on your own inclusive behaviours. So how can you do that? Well, the best way really to do it is to simply sit down and think about your practice in the past. So you might ask questions like, of yourself, like, how are you inclusive? Why are you inclusive? Why do you do it? How do you value diversity? Do you have positive relationships with your colleagues? Is it important to you to have that? How does that all fit with your personality? Is that something that comes natural to you? Is that something you have to work at? Are there areas you want to develop? So you're thinking, you're sitting down and reviewing how you are in terms of inclusivity and building positive working relationships with others. Question 2, please. Next slide. So in question 2, we're still reviewing, still self-assessing, but we're from a slightly different angle. In question 2, we're now thinking about the role of a people professional. How is it evolving? And it is evolving at a very fast rate. It's changing rapidly. So there are new activities, new things developing all the time, new challenges emerging. So how is that role changing? And as it's changing, what implications are there for you there? You may think about your own role as a generalist or a specialist, or a role you aspire to. You might think about a bit of both, generalist and specialist. But think about, what are the implications? What do I need to learn to stay current in my role and stay valuable in role? What do I know about AI? Do I need to gen up on that? So think about how the role's evolving and what are those implications, which is another way of bringing out areas for your development. So let's move on to question 3. So in question 3, we are now considering your responses for question 1 and 2. And we're also asking you to bring in some feedback from others, so at least one other person. And using those things, your response to question 1, your response to question 2, some feedback from at least one other person, maybe a manager, maybe a colleague, maybe a customer. You might have had a review recently, but to bring that feedback in, you might also involve your responses to task 1, because you did do quite a bit of reviewing in task 1 as well. So you're bringing all that information together to help you assess your current strengths, your weaknesses, and your development needs. And remember in that little bit that in your response, remember to explain who that feedback was from, who that other person was, and how that's informed your self-assessment. But for question 3, you should respond in full with what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what are your development needs, and how has that come about? How have you come to those conclusions? Next slide, please. So you've carried out your self-assessment, and now we're moving on to identify some activities to meet those development needs. So let's just have a look at the blue box first of all. So we're asking you to come up with some activities, and these can be formal, such as courses, seminars, online learning programs, etc. They could be informal. It might be things you want to read. It might be a series of podcasts you've heard about. It might be some videos. It might be something on YouTube you've heard about you want to follow up. You might decide there's some activity or task at work you're going to put yourself in line for, something you want to do, some activities that are going to develop you. So this is all about planning your development. And we want to know why you've chosen them. So for Q4, you're coming up with some development activities that you want to complete and some reasons why you've chosen those activities. So is it the method? Is the method appealing to you? Maybe it's the content. Is the content exactly fitting what you want to learn? Perhaps it's the timing. Maybe the timing works for you. Maybe you've picked some self-directed learning because that works for you timing-wise. Maybe it's about the others involved. Are you attracted by whoever's delivering it? Maybe it's the other people who are doing it, or maybe it just fits your learning preferences in some way. Why have you chosen these activities, and what are you aiming to achieve? Just a little note there, just going back to the note at the bottom of the box on the left in purple font, if you're seeing this in colour. It just might be a useful tip that if you're one of the people using the CIPD My Learning Plan for your development record and plan, then you might find it useful here just to step back and self-assess against the behaviours working inclusively and passion for learning. A good reason for doing that is because that assessment will then stimulate some development areas, some development ideas around those areas. So it will come up with some ideas for development activities for working inclusively and for passion for learning, the areas we're looking at here. And the system does come up with some pretty good and interesting development activities. So it doesn't mean you have to go with those, but it might just help your thinking, might just generate something for you to learn. We don't need to see that. We don't need to see your self-assessment pages. We don't need to see your learning plan pages from the system. All we want you to do is to include your activities in the body of your assignment. So question 4, you are responding within the body of your assignment. You're describing your chosen activities and your reasons for selecting them. Next slide, please. So questions 1 to 4 have all been within the body of your assignment. We're now moving to that different angle, different aspect that we mentioned at the beginning of this task. And question 5 is saying, right, stop there with the forward planning. 1 to 4 has been looking forwards. And now we're going to look backwards. So this is now a retrospective reflection. And question 5 is asking you to reflect on the impact of 3 previous learning activities. And we do keep repeating this. This is not the activities you've just planned at question 4, only hammering that home because so often people have thought that they've planned in question 4, now they've got to wait till those are put into practice. That's not the case. Question 4 is finished and question 5 is now looking backwards at different activities. There could be any activities, there could be anything that was formal and planned, it could have been something informal and unplanned that you did at the time, that you just kind of did in an unplanned way, you just opted to do it. But choose carefully, because it's quite important here that you choose activities that you can really talk about in terms of their impact. So we're looking at something from around the last 12 months that have actually impacted on your performance and your behaviour. Next slide, please. So just thinking about that impact, think about the activities. What did you get from them? So maybe you gained greater understanding, more knowledge, new skills. Maybe you learned about a specific task, a different job. You might have learned about work in general. You might have learned something about life in general. You might have learned something about yourself. All kinds of learning, new skills, new knowledge, new understanding. That's great. But how did that impact on you? Did it change the way you performed, the way you behaved? What was the impact? It's not just about learning, it's about impact. How did that change you? How did that change you in the way you behaved, in the way you perform at work, in the way you interact with others, whatever it is? Use your words wisely and tell us about the impact of your learning on your performance and behaviours. So that's why it's important to choose 3 carefully. Don't just choose something that was very superficial. Choose something that you can talk about and really explain some impact. Next slide, please. And you have options for how you present that reflection. You have 2 options. You can either present it as a professional development record, a PD record, but we don't want a huge record there. We just want to know about the 3 activities. So edit it down. If you're going to attach your PD, edit it down to just what we need for this question. Your tutor doesn't need to be going through your whole PD record. We just want to know about those 3 activities, your reflections on those activities. Alternatively, if you're using the CIPD My Reflections tool, you can include your reports from that. You can attach them from the system into your assignment. Just to be clear about those 2 options, next slide, please. The first option is your own format PD record. And remember that focus on what you did and what the impact was. Don't give us too much, just give us the most important, the essence of your development and the activities that impacted on your development. Next slide, please. Or the alternative, you can provide a report from the My CPD Reflections tool. Little tip there, if you are using that, it's quite useful to go into that system via Microsoft Edge. If that's not your typical browser, it's worth just using for this particular activity, because if you use Microsoft Edge, you then have access to the web capture function, which makes it easier to cut and paste. You can cut and paste from My Reflections tool and then add those to your assignment. Equally, from My Reflections tool, you can print out a PDF which you can attach to your assignment. But focus on, even though this doesn't count your word count, neither this or your PD record would count your word count, focus on the important things, what you did and what the impact was. Next slide, please. So when you've got to this stage, you've completed task 2. You should now have your evidence. So remember those questions 1 to 4, you've got 1,000 words to complete those. And remember that word count policy, plus or minus 10%. So questions 1 to 4, we want good full answers to those. And then you can add to that, without additional word count, either your own format CPD record, which is your reflections. Remember, it's edited, so it's just got the essence of what we want. Or equally, that alternative way of presenting the reports from the My Reflections tool. And again, just to stress, those additional reflections, whether it's in a PD record or a My Reflections tool, do not count to word count. Next slide, please. So you've completed task 1, you've completed task 2, and then there are just a few things to check. However satisfying it is to complete your assignment, it's really important that you do go back and check some of these things, well, all of these things. So have you added your name and student number? Have you proofread your assignment? Are there areas you want to edit, enhance? What about word count? If you're proofreading, don't take chunks out. If that's going to affect word count, make sure that even when you proofread and edit, that you're still in line with word count. Check that you have a clear layout. Have you used those subheadings? Have you used the question number? And particularly, have you added the assessment criteria references at the end of your subheadings? And of course, make sure you submit your assignment on time. Next slide, please. So we've now reached the end of the webinar. So it's worth saying here that there are other webinars for other units, which might equally be helpful to you. So it's worth checking those out. And finally, just to say thank you for listening and good luck with your assignment. Thank you.